Okay, everyone, we are back. It's not quite 5 minutes, but I feel like I gave it enough time because I was already all set up. So, we're going to hop in here into the game just in a little bit. I'm going to go over raw, kind of stuff I'm going to go over. I'm first going to go over his skills because I feel like I should go in depth on his skills just in case people don't fully understand the kit. Then I'm going to go over his strengths, his weaknesses, kind of how he goes into the whole mid lane, and kind of the stuff that you want to take from my mid lane guy and apply to raw. And then we're just going to go over a quick build and a quick skill order. I'm not going to go over the solo lane raw. I'll give it brief mention in passing, because it's pretty much the same skill order and build. There's just a small, minor difference, and so I'll just kind of mention it in passing when we get to it. But first, let's go straight into game, and let's look at raw. So raw, pretty basic, kind of slow auto attack. I miss the ADC raw that you used to be able to do. But pretty much, the whole goal here is he has a few interesting things to his kit that are worth mentioning. One is the passive. So the passive, you can see, as I go and use skills, I'm gaining a lot of movement speed. That's why you see a lot of raw players when they're leaving the fountain, they'll use a skill or two. Because they'll get faster movement speed to get out to lane. And while you're running around, refreshing it isn't a bad idea if you have the mana to spare, because this will let you get to mid fights quicker, to really any fight quicker. It'll make you more mobile, and so if you end up running into someone in the jungle, it's pretty easy. Generally, the skills you kind of want to use for that would be, like, if you have to use a skill, Divine Light is pretty much one of the easiest ones to use. You just got to be aware, because, like, right there, I canceled it because it doesn't activate this passive until it detonates. But pretty much this is kind of like your one skill that is useful to save, but you want to save your damage skill in case something happens or you get to a team fight. And if you know you're not going to be going to a team fight, you want to use the one just because it's the quickest back. But yeah, that's pretty much his passive. You can get essentially up to 24% increased movement speed. And so you can see at max I'm at 489 movement speed. At lowest I'm at 413. So it's actually a really significant jump. It's not something you just want to kind of scoff at. His one, pretty straightforward. You use it, you shoot a beam, goes pretty far, does damage to anyone hit by the beam. The hitbox of the beam itself is actually quite big. This entire radius is essentially correct. You can see as I move it in, this is going to hit. And so visually it might not look like it's going to hit, but it will clip that target. And so you can kind of use this any way you want. The best way you want to use this is in lane, just use it to clear. You can shoot it diagonally a little bit, because if you shoot diagonally, it'll still hit all the minions. And I'll go over to the minion camp just to kind of show off that. But you also need to lead it if you're looking to hit a target. So, like, for example, if I'm sitting here in lane, and I know that ADC's, or the enemy mid's sitting over there, I can still hit all of them while trying to hit them off to the side. Just worth noting. But when you're using it, it's a long travel time. So it takes quite a bit of time for it to actually reach its furthest destination. And so depending on where the enemy is, like if they were standing like right here running this direction, I might lead as much as this just to hit them. And so that's something you need to get used to when you're playing raw. It's not something you're going to pick up immediately. But yeah, you gotta lead your target. Same thing with the ultimate, but I'll get into that. The two, pretty straightforward. You use it, you create this blinding light around you that'll slow people around you, and that's probably the most important part of the skill. And if they're looking at you when it detonates, it'll blind them. Most players are pretty good at doing this and turning back at you, so it's not really that big of a bonus except against newer players. This range indicates its damage range and its slow range. And so really, anyone around you in this radius is going to get slowed by a lot. It's slow per stack, so the sooner you get them in it. So if you get them at the start, it's 0.3 and then 2 seconds, so it'll tick 6 times, essentially. 6 times for 5% is 30%. It's a pretty significant slow, and it's also good for chasing people. You can chase people with it, and they'll essentially get right on top of you, so you can 1. This also combos with your 1 and your 3, because if you're chasing someone and you try on this 2 and they're slowed, a lot easier to hit your 1. It's just much easier to hit your 1. And with your 3, if you're sitting in your 3 looking for a heal and you're kiting people around your heal, it's a lot easier to kite with your increased movement speed while you're also slowing them. And so you see a lot of raws, like, they'll commit to a fight because they know once they're in their heal and their 2's activated, not only are they getting a decent amount of movement speed increase, but it's really hard to hit them, especially if you're melee. 3, pretty basic. When you toss it on someone, it heals them. It does damage to enemies if they're standing in it, and so If you're aggressing in a fight, you want to place it really far forward. So like if I'm sitting back here, my teammates are all forward. It wouldn't be a bad idea for me to use it, have them sit in it, kind of walk forward and look to aggress with it. If we're not winning a fight or we're playing back, you want to be careful about how far forward you put this. It's more likely that you're going to be putting it here while the fight's over there if it's going poorly, so people can retreat back to it. They have a fallback point, and so your backline can get heals if they're getting beat up. The worst thing you can do as a Raw is put down a heal that is going to put people in danger to go towards. So if like the entire enemy team is there and you use it there, well, you might be doing some damage to the enemy team, but if I want to walk forward here, especially late game, I'm going to get blown up. It's going to be a little bit of practice for newer players to kind of get used to where to put it, but once you have a good sense of it, people will respond to it. They'll hear that noise, and they will immediately respond to where it is and go there, as long as it's a safe place. And the final skill is the ultimate, which I'll show off here, just kind of the range of it. So I can hit Gold Fury from here. So this is the max range of it, right? And it's really good. It goes through walls, it goes through everything, and it's instantaneous. So you don't need, it has a wind-up time, so you'll need to lead it, depending on how far the opponent is. If compared to a max range 1 versus a ultimate, you need to lead slightly less with this skill, but you will need to lead a little bit because when I use it here, it has a good second wind-up time. It takes a fair amount of time to actually use. And you'll also note that even though I have max CDR, this cooldown is really low. That's 30. The actual cooldown for Raw's ultimate, I believe, is 55? I think. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it's low. The whole point is it's low. So that means when you use it, you're going to get it up really quickly. You're going to get it up at least within the minute. And because of that, you can kind of use it. It's almost wastefully. This isn't a bad skill to be like, oh, they're taking enemy harpies. I'm just gonna sit there and ult it to try and take it for myself. And if you use it at the right time, if they're not ready to hand it, you'll probably get them because you can pretty much bring harpies, especially early game, from like half health to 0 really quickly. Plus, you'll also damage them, which is a plus because they're going to be standing in a really predictable spot. The other thing is a really good initiating tool as well as a really good finisher. You can initiate a fight where you see people lined up with a lot of damage, or you can look to catch a straggler that would normally get away with the snipe. So it has a multi-functionality too. Some quick combos, just to kind of go over them, is you'd want to 2 someone, and once they're fully slowed, if you can 1 and ult in the direction they're going. So that initial 1 will hit, and I fired it this way, and I can look at the direction they're running and kind of lead my ultimate to it. And when they're slow by that much, it's pretty easy to hit. If they're stunned at a further distance, you can also just do the 1 ult combo. But it's pretty straightforward. Generally, you want to use your 2 pretty defensively. You want to have your 3 in a place where you can constantly sit there and be in a fight and still do damage without being too risky. Throw out 1s whenever you can. Try and hit multiple people if you can. And then ultimates are just kind of whenever you need it. If you see people lined up, go for it. If you see a straggler, go for it. That's really what the skill usage is for. So let's kind of go over his strengths. If you look at his skill, he has a lot of sustain. This heal per tick is 60 with a total. I'm trying to remember what it is total. What the actual scaling on it is for the heal. Let me just bring that up real quick. But it's a really potent heal, and it's for all 5 members as long as they're standing in it. And it's really hard for the enemy to stand it too, because they're taking significant damage per tick. I believe the tick is every second, and so total it would be about 360 healing. And let's see if I can do this math. 6 times 4, 48, 408. 408. And the scaling would be, if I actually took the time to search, is 20%. So that actually has 120% scaling on the damage component and 15% on the healing component. And 15 times 6 would be 90. So 90% scaling on the healing, 120% on the damage. So this is a pretty good skill that gets relevant with, as it gets way more relevant, and the healing isn't ever mitigated. So this can get pretty potent pretty quick. In team fights, this essentially will turn a bad-looking team fight into a really good one, or it will make sure that kills don't happen. Like if someone's going to get killed, like you can heal and they can kind of kite in it, and they can get healthy pretty quickly. And so he has really good self-sustain and self-sustain for his team. It also has good laning purposes for the fact that it can heal minions as well and makes it hard to kill minions. He has long range damage, so his 1 is a pretty long range, his ult is a pretty long range. He can toss his heal really far, and so he can play as either this long range caster that plays really safely helping his team, or he can actually aggress pretty hard with this 2. He can 1 and then he can 3 on top of himself while he's kiting and getting his 1 cooldowns back and his 2 cooldowns back. He can get himself into good positions to fight. So he can play long range or close range pretty effectively. And he's hard to kill for that same reason, right? If you're on Raw, not only is he likely, especially after a fight, having his full movement speed, but if he really wants, he can slow you to try and get you off. He can heal himself as he's running. Like, if he tosses it in front of himself, he can get definitely 2 ticks at least, which will be like an extra, late game, it'll be like an extra 200 health. He can then turn a fight and actually fight in it. A good example would be, I actually know what I should do. I should, after I go over everything, I should go watch that fight that Boosh had, where he like played Raw perfectly and explain everything that he's doing, because he probably played the best Raw I've ever seen. And he showed kind of how you not only aggress with everything, but how you kind of can like fall back and heal too. His 1 close range is pretty much a guaranteed hit, so if you want to really chase onto him, he can kind of damage you to pressure him off. And also his ultimate. The other thing I didn't mention about the ultimate is CC immunity. You can avoid being CC'd if you time your ult right. So you can actually, like, if Ares is chain pulling you, you can just snipe Ares and won't get pulled, which is pretty good. His weaknesses, though, he's not as mobile as others. Like, sure, he has the increased movement speed, but he doesn't have a leap. He doesn't have a quick gap closer. He doesn't have a dash or anything. Poseidon, on average, will move faster than him without having to cast any abilities, and when he activates his 2, he'll definitely move faster. So he's not as mobile as others, but he's not the least mobile by any means. And also in the kind of same regard, he's not as much burst as others. Ao Kuang has more burst combo with his 1 and his ultimate, and potentially tornadoes if he gets a good tornado tick. He-Bo has more straight-up burst, Scylla has more straight-up burst, but his burst isn't bad. And so his weakness is more that he's pretty much a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. The only thing that he really kind of has going for him is the snipe, but Ao Kuang Ultimate is fairly similar, it's just slightly slower, and so he's really just kind of a jack-of-all-trades, which is why I kind of recommend him, is you never feel like you're outclassed completely, but you never feel like you're the best at everything, and so he's pretty easy to kind of understand, like, everyone's weaknesses and everyone's advantage, because he can kind of use all of them to his effect. And he's also really reliant on leading his skills. In a lot of cases, you're going to have to lead this 1 a lot. You're going to have to lead the ultimate a lot, and not only getting the hang of it, but also actively hitting people with it who know to juke can be a problem. Like, you can actually sit there and see someone running this way, and instead of leading to the right, just aim where they are. When you charge it up, they'll run this way, and then they'll run back right into it. And so, like, you have to start getting into the mind of your opponents really hard to know when to, like, really lead hard, and when to predict that they're not going to lead hard, or maybe that they're going to cut a completely different direction. And so that can be problematic as well. But you'll get used to it as you play. And kind of going over the laning phase matchups, you can use his heal and everything to advantage. So, for example, in a lane matchup versus bad clear, and so I said, like, if a person has bad clear, there's ways to counter it. Ra is kind of the best character at doing that. And so if I go to this minion wave heal here, that minion's about to die, toss a heal on. Oh, nope, missed. Good. Let's clear this so it resets. But, I almost wish I was a lower level for this, but regardless. You have pretty good clear with your 1, and you're going to be leveling up your 1. And even if this 1 doesn't kill the wave, it's going to be really hard for anyone on the other team to kill the wave. Even against an Ao Kuang that places a tornado on the entire wave, you can just sit here and be like, oh, I'm going to heal my entire minion wave, because you can see they group up this way, and so you can just toss down that heal. And if you place it a little bit more forward, you can generally catch these melees in it as well. And so you can kind of push the wave by healing your own, and the 1 is just really good wave clear on its own. So people with bad wave clear especially are going to have a really hard time dealing with you, because you're going to be pushing the wave hard. Your minions are always going to be healthy, and then they're going to get pushed under tower early because they can't compete with it. And so you can use that to your early advantage, get more experience by being able to rotate more freely, get more gold, which is going to be the most likely thing that happens out of that, because they're going to be pushed under a tower, and when the tower gets a hit on a minion, they lose the gold. And that's really kind of how you want to play the lane matchup. The only other thing is when you have the minion advantage and they're not backing off, and this is more for people who are newer or in the lower queues, because most mids won't make this mistake. But if they stay forward when the minion wave's about to die, use your 2. This is why I generally pick up my 2 when I'm laning, is because if you slow them and they realize too late that they needed to back off, you're going to land that 1, and you're going to be auto-attacking them for a lot, and they're going to eat a lot of minion damage. You can bring them to critical, if not kill them. And especially early on, when at any point, like after a few waves, you could get your ultimate, that could mean they just die if you land the ultimate. And so you don't want to play passive as Ra, because he pretty much is the definition of I'm going to have lane dominance. Where Ao Kuang, sure he has lane dominance, but he's really kind of scared to go forward. Ra has his self-heal, he has a slow, he has higher movement speed. He can push the wave and be aggressive with it too, which is good. The other thing is, when you're, so kind of tying into mid-harpies he's really good at because he can actually toss the heal out aggressively, so you can fight on the mid-harpies with the heal. It's really hard to like, invade on a Ra heal. And he's also really good at poking people before. He has 1 that can go through walls. And so if they're sitting behind the wall, you can poke some damage. If they commit too hard, they're in a straight line for you to ult. Just kind of stuff like that. He's really good at contesting mid-harpies. And finally, lane rotations. This movement speed means that he can get to places pretty quickly. And the fact that he has a snipe that has such a long range, he doesn't even need to fully commit to a rotation to be effective. As long as he lands a snipe in a lane, it'll probably result in a kill. And then he can run back to his lane and farm. And so that's kind of just his laning phase in general. Some tips that you might not know about Ra. His slow, I kind of went over this when I went over the skills, but let's just go over it again. His slow basically sets up your 1 for free. If they're slowed, you're not missing this 1. Like, it's really hard to miss your 1 on a slow target that's that close. The other thing is, he has a combo, which is, and I went over this again with the slow and into 1 ult. If they're stunned and you know for a fact that you can hit your 1 and your ultimate, you want to go with your 1 first. Because if you want to look at these back harpies and when I use my ult, and watch the travel time. It'll hit the max range of your 1 by the time the ult finishes. And so if you were to ult and then 1, they're going to probably have enough time to escape the stun, or whatever is keeping them bound to be able to hit by the 1 ult. So you want to lead with your 1 and then ult if you're going to go for it. And that slightly increases the chance your ult will miss, but if you're that confident to go for it anyways, you shouldn't miss the ultimate, because you knew that they were going to be stuck. Like with Fenrir grabbing someone, or you know that there's a stun coming from a Thor, you can start the 1 a little bit preemptively before the stun happens and land the ult. Just kind of stuff like that. And in the same vein of that is junglers who are invading your lane or going to gank your lane. When they're ganking the enemy laner, they're going to expect that your ult happens on their CC, just intuitively. So if Freya banishes and is about to start beating on someone, they're expecting you to ult when the banish ends, and they're playing around it, so don't disappoint them on that. They've set up a free way for your ultimate to hit, and so you should have already been in position because you knew the jungler was coming to gank. And so even if it sacrifices your positioning because you weren't aware and you're still too far back, you still want to at least land the ult so that the jungler has a good chance of killing. And someone, Bliskner, brought up a good point. So this lasts for 6 seconds and it ticks, but the first tick happens immediately when it lands. And so unless they're in it for the first time you've cast it, they're missing out on the first tick. That's a good tip I hadn't even really thought of, but yeah, it's there. And realistically, it's probably not going to matter too much, but do know that you do have a way to instantly heal someone for at least 60 to 80 health. And that can be really useful in certain situations. I went over this with the heal, but let's go over it again just because it's really important. Forward fights and forward heals means your team's aggressing. Your team is naturally going to flock to the heal, and so so you kind of slightly control your team a little bit because everyone knows stand in the raw heal. So if you place it forward, people are going to go towards it. So if you're aggressing a fight, place it forward. If you're falling back, place your heal back. People will intuitively go back to it. And so it's kind of a way to control your team in a sense, because everyone just knows what to kind of do around raw heal, because it's such a kind of obvious mechanic that you can kind of lead your team to play correctly, depending on how you're viewing the fight. And especially from someone who's having a back view of the fight in a lot of situations, you kind of can make a good judgment call. But that also means you have a responsibility. If you mean to back and you place this heal here, you're putting your team in a really shit spot. If your team's all the way up there, all of them, and you place the heal back here, no one's getting benefit from it. So be careful. You're leading your team, but you also have a lot of impact into how a team fight goes based off the heal. And let's see, is there anything else? And that should be it for tips. I'm trying to think of any more just off the top of my head. Just kind of some general things is get used to this max range. It's really, you'll eventually get good at judging it, but a lot of people will use snipes when they're just slightly out of range. A good way to check is if you're just sitting there, you can kind of get a max range by when the target gets highlighted like that. That means they're in range. So I am now just in range. If I go back even a little bit, this is not going to hit. So see how that didn't hit? So you can kind of use the ult targeter to judge it. But that should be pretty much it for tips. So let's go back to my main cam for a little bit. And so now I'm going to go over builds.